Hey guys, tonight we step into the flickering torchlight of a forgotten age, where sacred altars cast long shadows and every bite could carry the spirit of a god, or a former enemy. You're barefoot, your robes hem, brushing the dust of some ancient stone courtyard, and something strange is roasting on a spit. It smells smoky, maybe too smoky. The old priest chants, the people cheer, and you're invited to dinner. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is, because something tells me your midnight snack's about to lose its charm. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, squinting past the incense. The crowd gathers, faces painted with reverence. Some are chanting, others just look hungry. You've landed in the heart of a Mesoamerican ritual, maybe among the Aztecs, where war and feasting danced hand in hand. The captured enemy wasn't just an unfortunate soul, they were divine calories. Sacrifice was not only spiritual, it was also, at times, culinary. Welcome to the banquet of gods. Historians still argue whether the post-sacrificial consumption was symbolic or literal. Was it a ceremonial nibble or a full family-style meal? Either way, your stomach clenches. Imagine this. The warrior you just saw paraded through the city is now the centerpiece of a feast. His thigh, roasted with herbs, is offered by the priest. A holy dish, a holy moment. You're handed a piece on maize bread, like some cosmic taco. You hesitate. Someone beside you mutters, "To consume is to honor." And sure, you've had some weird street food, but this? Here's a mainstream historical anchor, the Florentine Codex, compiled by the Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagún, painstakingly describes Aztec rituals where god impersonators were sacrificed, their flesh consumed in rituals described as sacred communion. To Western ears, it sounds like horror, but to the people around you, it's love, it's devotion, it's lunch. You retreat slightly only to find yourself in the Andes now, where Incan stories whisper of a different kind of hunger. The highlands are dry, the wind cuts. You're with a small group huddled around a frozen child. The body is astonishingly preserved. You try not to stare at the skin still stretched over the cheekbones. Archaeologists will later find signs that ritual offerings, capacocha, sometimes included selective dismemberment. You shiver, and not from the cold. But let's switch hemispheres for a second, because while the Americas had their sacred bites over in Papua New Guinea, you're trudging into a world that's part myth, part anthropology seminar, and part fear factor. Here, the four people practiced endocannibalism, not out of brutality, but out of deep love. When someone died, you didn't bury them, you consumed them. It was a way to keep them close, to make sure no part of the spirit drifted away. Grandma becomes soup isn't exactly comforting, but in this world, it's deeply respectful. You drink the bone broth and feel her memories warming your chest, or you pretend to, because if you don't eat her, she'll be alone. But there's a twist. In the 20th century, a strange disease started spreading among the four, especially among women and children. Tremors, stumbling, uncontrollable laughter. It was called kuru, also known as the laughing death. Turns out, consuming the brain of a loved one, though heartfelt, spreads prions. Think of it as microscopic chaos that punches holes in your brain. Not so funny after all. And quirky enough, the very act of honoring a family member turned into an unintentional epidemic, part cultural devotion, part neurological landmine. And still, some elders say it was worth it. You blink, and you're back among ancient Celts, perhaps, in whispers from Roman writers like Diodorus Siculus. They claimed Celts hung heads on their walls like trophies and, in some rumors, tasted warrior hearts to absorb their courage. While likely exaggerated, Romans weren't above demonizing their enemies. The core idea sticks. Eating someone wasn't always savage. It could be aspirational. You pause here. Try to imagine what's going through someone's mind at the edge of a battlefield. Your enemy lies bleeding. Your people chant for justice. The old druid leans in with his stone blade. In his culture, this might be the holiest of moments. You, on the other hand, are regretting that pre-battle granola bar. And then there's China. A fringe account buried in old imperial records tells of Ge J. Ru, where loyal sons might cut a piece of flesh from their own leg to make a healing soup for an ailing parent, a loving, painful broth. One Tang Dynasty woman reportedly carved her thigh to make porridge for her mother-in-law. Bet you've never felt that obligated to bring soup to your relatives. Mother-in-law relationships, still tricky even with human ingredients. But what does this tell you? In many ancient cultures, the body wasn't just a body. It was currency, power, communion, healing, dinner. Whether in ritual sacrifice, filial piety, or warrior's courage, flesh had meaning beyond meat. It held memory, purpose, and sometimes, seasoning. Still, you wonder, how much of this is historical fact? How much is cultural projection? And how much is whispered exaggeration turned bedtime terror? Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or isolated, sincere or strategic, religious or just hungry. The line between reverence and appetite, it's thinner than your average rice paper roll. And as you drift along this dim-lit trail, one thing becomes clear. What repels you today might have once been sacred, beautiful, or necessary. Context is everything, especially when you're the one holding the fork. You step out of the circle, your stomach tight, your mind racing. But the journey's just begun. Up next, a visit to the world's most dramatic empire, where medicine, mysticism, and gladiator sweat became a recipe for dessert. You brush off the dust of ritual fires, only to find yourself striding across marbled floors. The stone is cool beneath your bare feet, the air faintly metallic, and somewhere in the distance, cheers erupt like waves crashing against an arena. You've landed in Rome, grandeur, spectacle, and just a pinch of unsettling culinary experimentation. No one tells you this when they glamorize ancient Rome, but here's the secret. The Colosseum didn't just feed the bloodlust of the crowd, it fed something else too. You squint past the crowd's roaring faces to the center of the arena. A gladiator falls, his sword clatters, blood pools, and somewhere nearby, a physician carefully dips a cloth into the crimson spill. Not out of reverence, no, out of preparation. That blood, still warm, is medicine. Or at least, it's believed to be. You, wide-eyed and trying not to gag, watch as that same blood is brought to a waiting patient. Maybe someone with epilepsy, because in certain Roman circles, fresh gladiator blood was considered a cure, not dried, not diluted, fresh, warm from the source. Ideally from a strong masculine warrior, because strength, they believed, transferred through essence. You think back to that questionable protein shake you bought once. This is worse. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Roman medical texts and writers like Pliny the Elder documented the practice. Not just blood, gladiator liver too. It was dried, powdered, and sold in markets. You didn't have to be rich to buy it. You just had to be bold enough to swallow it. And let's be honest, liver's tough even without the whole fresh from combat detail. But not all Romans agreed. Some scoffed at these remedies. Others profited handsomely. The economy of death was booming. After all, gladiators died in public view. Why not reuse the parts? Historians still argue whether this practice was common medical treatment or fringe quackery embraced by desperate relatives and entrepreneurial physicians. But the idea stuck. Gladiator remains weren't just waste. They were resources. You could even say, organ-ic medicine. Sorry. You're ushered now into a Roman bathhouse full of steamy conversation and, well, a shocking fringe tidbit. Some accounts whisper that Roman women used a mixture of animal placenta, sweat, and yes, gladiator bodily residue in beauty treatments, youth through death, radiance through ritual. These recipes were rarely written down, would you admit to them? But the whispers cling like humidity in the room. And in between all this, there's dinner. You're invited to a banquet. The host reclines on a plush couch, waving at his slaves to bring in the next course. Dishes arrive, opulent and steaming, peacock tongues, stuffed dormice. And, wait, is that a human finger? Okay, breathe. That one's probably a joke. Satirists like Petronius exaggerated Roman luxury for comedic effect, but the fact that such things could even be joked about? tells you how close Roman imagination drifted to the taboo. You sip your wine. It's watered down, typical. A guest leans in and recounts a tale of Roman generals far from the empire's heart, resorting to cannibalism during sieges, not out of ritual but necessity. The ultimate irony of an empire that fed itself on the world. When the world ran dry, they fed on each other. You're starting to see a pattern, aren't you? Whether framed as medicine, cosmetic, or survival, human remains in Rome were more than grim leftovers. They were tools, products, currency in a world where death didn't mean waste. Let's pivot, because what's Rome without a little travel? You're now in a small village on the fringes of the empire, maybe in Gaul or Germania. It's dusk. Someone is telling stories by the fire. A child listens, eyes wide, as an elder recounts the tale of the Vitalis Panis, bread of the vital ones. The story hints at soldiers mixing the blood of fallen comrades into dough as a sign of eternal brotherhood. There's no hard evidence this bread existed, but the myth, part folklore, part PTSD-fueled poetry, clings to the region like wet moss. It's strangely comforting, you think. The idea that sharing blood could bind people, even in bread. You half expect someone to market it as a protein snack in 2025. Back in Rome proper, the lines between culinary, medicinal, and mystical blur further. A rumor floats that emperors consume parts of conquered kings, not for sustenance, but for domination. Total absorption of the enemy, spiritually and physically. Historical fiction? Maybe. Or maybe it was just one time. Emperors had strange appetites. Caligula? Don't even ask. You find yourself near a temple now, where the rites are quiet, the smells sweeter, incense, not iron. A priestess chants over a bowl filled with what looks like dark wine, or something else. The mix is symbolic, of course, but the symbolism implies a history, one where rituals once required more than herbs and whispers. By the end of the night, your head spinning from sandalwood smoke and speculation. The Roman world loved order, roads, columns, laws, but beneath that marble veneer, there was chaos, hunger, a gnawing desire to conquer not just lands, but flesh itself. Whether through medicine, vanity, or ritual, the human body wasn't sacred by default. It was useful. And in that usefulness, a strange kind of logic formed. If death gives you something, strength, healing, glory, why not taste it? You're full now, not with food, but with questions. You've chewed through the paradox of a society that could build aqueducts and still believe in gladiator blood smoothies. And you're not done yet. Because as you leave the empire behind, your next stop serves a very different kind of delicacy. One where kings were turned into powder, mummies became spice, and European nobles sipped the sacred remains of the dead like fine sherry. You step onto the creaking wooden floorboards of a medieval apothecary. The shelves are lined with glass jars, and one of them is labeled man's flesh powdered. Bon appétit. The air is thick with clove and camphor as you step deeper into the apothecary. The shelves creak under the weight of old remedies, powdered rhino horn, dried leeches, crushed beetles. But what catches your eye isn't the jar of unicorn dust, which, let's be honest, was probably just powdered narwhal tusk. It's the one labeled Mumia Vera Egyptiaca, real Egyptian mummy. That's not a nickname, that's a literal label. Yes, you're in early modern Europe now, where the rich, the noble, and the sickly all agreed on one thing. Nothing said healing like sipping on a dead pharaoh's powdered skull. You lean in closer. The apothecary, in his dusty apron and ink-stained fingers, offers you a sniff. The powder smells earthy, a little salty. You try not to imagine where it's been for the last 3,000 years. Here's your mainstream historical fact. For centuries, especially during the Renaissance and Baroque periods, mumia was a popular medicine across Europe. Ground mummy flesh and bone were believed to treat everything from headaches to epilepsy to internal bleeding. It was sold in pharmacies. It was prescribed by respected doctors. Even royalty partook. King Charles II of England reportedly carried a special concoction known as the King's Drops, which included crushed human skull mixed with alcohol, because nothing says divine right like sipping on a bit of corpse. Historians still argue whether these medicinal mummies were all ancient Egyptians, or if many were, more recent. Let's just say there was a booming black market for fresh corpses wrapped in linen and doused in pitch, passed off as long-dead royals. You might call it artificial antiquity, a little faux pharaoh to keep up the illusion. But don't blame just the physicians. Artists joined the party too. In 16th century Venice, artists like Tintoretto and Delacroix supposedly used mumia as a pigment, mummy brown, rich, earthy, and slightly cursed. You imagine them mixing their oils with a pinch of powdered priest and casually brushing a portrait of the Virgin Mary. Picture that hanging over your grandmother's mantle. You shift uncomfortably, but the room spins again. Now you're seated in a grand hall. Candelabras flicker above. A table is laid out with pewter cups. You're somewhere in 17th century Germany, perhaps. And someone's raising a toast. A small goblet is passed to you, deep red liquid sloshing within. You glance down. It's a blood tonic, not metaphorical, not from grapes, from a recently executed criminal. Yes, this was a thing. Public executions weren't just for spectacle. They were pharmacies with a pulse. As the axe fell or the noose snapped, a crowd gathered not to gawk, but to collect. The freshest blood, ideally still warm, was ladled into containers and drunk immediately. The poor believed it restored vitality. The sick saw it as their last chance. And the executioner? He was part doctor, part bartender. Quirky tidbit alert. Some people brought bread to soak in the blood like a macabre communion wafer, crispy on the outside, iron-rich on the inside. You take a sip, or pretend to. It's metallic, pungent, and unnerving. But it's not about taste, it's about hope. This was a world where people clung to life with trembling fingers and were told, drink this and you might live. Desperate times make for desperate cocktails. And in the court of high society, things didn't get less weird. You're in France now. The Palace of Versailles glimmers under gold and gossip. Madame de Sévigné, famed letter writer, mentions nobles experimenting with blood potions to retain youth. One countess was rumored to bathe in virgin blood, not because she was a vampire, that would come later, but because it was fashionable. And nothing says longevity like an awkward human marinade. This wasn't just about healing the sick, it was about cheating death. One scholar described it as medicinal cannibalism, a practice where flesh, bone, and blood were turned into pharmaceuticals. And it wasn't fringe, it was mainstream. People who wouldn't dare bite into a steak-cooked rare were casually licking powdered heart off a spoon, or rubbing skull fragments into their wounds like Neolithic glitter. But it wasn't all outward consumption. Some monks, yes, monks, believed that relics of saints could be absorbed through proximity. One tale tells of monks in northern Italy who believed sniffing the dust of a saint's finger bone brought visions. Another claimed that the smell of sanctified blood in a vial could cure melancholy, whether hallucination or divine contact. Historians still argue. You press forward. The rooms grow darker, the jars more sinister. One's filled with molasses-thick black oil labeled oil of man. You don't ask, you just know. And here's the strange thing. Despite the horror, despite the absurdity, it worked, or at least people believed it did. In a world without antibiotics, where the common cold could be a death sentence, a spoonful of skull dust didn't seem that wild. It was faith, desperation, a cocktail of hope and horror. You find yourself in a chapel now. Candles flicker low. A woman kneels, whispering a prayer, holding a vial. Inside is a fragment of human bone, perhaps saint, perhaps sinner. She drinks a tincture of dissolved relic, tears streaming down her cheeks. Is it belief? Is it medicine? Does the difference even matter? You sit beside her, heartbeat slowing. Europe didn't need monsters in the woods. It had them on the pharmacy shelves. You think back to the apothecary, the mummies, the powdered skull, back to kings sipping bone-infused wine, and you realize the idea of consuming human flesh wasn't fringe. It was woven into the fabric of early modern life. It was normalized, professionalized, and often monetized. We remember cannibalism as something they did, ancient tribes, faraway places. But for centuries, the most civilized societies in the West quietly consumed the dead in pursuit of life. The practice didn't vanish with the Enlightenment. It just got more discreet. And as you step out into the cobbled street, moonlight casting long shadows, you wonder, what remnants of these rituals echo in today's medicine cabinets? In the collagen supplements, the placenta face creams, the ancient remedies aisle? You walk slowly, heart heavier. But don't worry, there's still one course left on the menu. And it's the most controversial of all. The cultures who knew it was taboo, and did it anyway. The cobblestones give way beneath your feet. You're walking through time again, but now there's a weight to your steps. You've wandered altars, arenas, and apothecaries. You've swallowed potions, figuratively, thankfully, that once dripped from criminals and kings. But here, in this final stretch, things shift. You're entering the domain of those who knew it was wrong and still took a bite. The wind carries the faint scent of smoke and salt. You're standing at the edge of the sea on some forgotten island. Or maybe it's just a metaphor now. You hear drums, low and rhythmic, echoing through the palm-lined forest. This is Fiji, long before the travel brochures, known in colonial whispers as the Cannibal Isles. But let's be clear, the people here aren't savages. They're deeply spiritual, organized, they farm, they pray, they raise families, and yes, they eat people. But not just anyone. There are rules, ritual, structure. Cannibalism here is interwoven with power, war captives mostly, sometimes traitors. It's punishment, honor, and warning, all at once. In some tribes, eating a man was the ultimate way to humiliate him and elevate yourself. To consume your enemy was to erase him from this world and carry his power into the next. A quirky fringe tidbit: one chieftain, Udri Udre, was said to keep a stone for every person he'd consumed. By some accounts, his collection reached nearly 900. That's not dinner, that's a legacy. You're led into a ceremonial hut. No one's cooking. This is memory now. This is why, not just how. Elders chant about ancestors. The fire flickers across their faces as they retell old victories, old meals. One whispers that the taste wasn't the point. It was the symbol. You take something in to make something whole. And then you blink and you're in ancient China again. But not with filial soups. This is law and punishment now. The practice is called lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts. Executions so drawn out they became legend. A sentence reserved for traitors and the most despised. But there's something darker swirling beneath the surface. Because sometimes, after the condemned were mutilated, pieces of their bodies were rumored to be eaten by executioners, or, occasionally, the victim's enemies. Was it widespread? Historians still argue whether these accounts were exaggerated imperial propaganda or chilling truth. But even the possibility says something about the line people were willing to cross in the name of vengeance. You're not just killing a man, you're obliterating him from within. Your head's spinning now, and not just from the emotional whiplash. You're being pulled again, this time to Africa, pre-colonial Congo. In some kingdoms, cannibalism was practiced, but selectively. Enemies defeated in battle were sometimes consumed, not for nutrition, but for metaphysical dominance. The conqueror believed that the enemy's soul could live on within their body. It was a theological digestion, not a snack. You meet a village elder who explains, in slow, thoughtful cadence, that it wasn't about hunger. It was about making sure the spirit had nowhere to return. Only through consumption could they ensure peace. You nod, unsure whether to feel chilled or enlightened. You want a break, but the past won't let you rest just yet. You're in early colonial North America now, and it's winter. Brutal, endless winter. Snow whips against the wooden palisades of a small English settlement. Jamestown, 1609. Supplies have vanished, so have some of the settlers. Archaeologists will uncover the evidence much later. Butcher marks on human bones. A child's skull. Sections carved clean. The starving time, they called it. Settlers ate the dead to survive. Desperate, cold, reduced to instinct. This is cannibalism stripped of culture, stripped of ritual. It's pure survival. It's the terrifying truth that the human body can become meat, not because it's sacred, but because it's available. You stumble into the snow, horrified, sympathetic, conflicted. Even in the 20th century, the taboo lingers but never dies. A plane crashes in the Andes. You're on the mountain now, wind screaming, frost biting your skin. Survivors huddle in the fuselage, starving. One of them stares blankly at a frozen leg. A friend, a brother. They wait as long as they can, but eventually they choose life. They cut, they eat. This isn't about ancient myths. This is modern history. They would survive. Some would become doctors, others authors, all of them haunted. Still, they said they never felt shame, only gratitude, because in death, their friends gave life. You return now to a candlelit room, this one in your time, maybe your own. The question hangs there like mist. What makes cannibalism taboo? Because across every age, someone's done it, in reverence, in revenge, in desperation, for medicine, for power, sometimes with songs, sometimes with tears, always with meaning. You wonder, if society collapsed tomorrow, how long would the rule last? One day, a week, you glance down at your hands, still yours, still flesh. But now you understand what that means, what it's meant for thousands of years. To be human is to be haunted by hunger, not just for food, but for life, power, healing, justice, survival. And sometimes that hunger gets literal. But don't worry, you've made it through the course. No bones in your teeth, just knowledge. And maybe a slightly more cautious approach to anything labeled vintage protein. You curl up now, blanket pulled to your chin, heartbeat slow. Let's wind down. The fire is low, the air's soft now, thick with shadows and story. Outside your window, the world is quiet. No drums, no hymns, just the steady hush of wind. You breathe deeply. What you've seen tonight, tasted even in imagination, spanned empires, crossed oceans, walked the blurry edges of morality and belief. Some of it chilled you, some of it surprised you, some of it made you laugh, despite yourself. But beneath all of it ran a single thread, the enduring question of what it means to share flesh, as punishment, as cure, as communion. And you, safe, full, maybe just a little disturbed, now understand that it wasn't always horror. Sometimes it was love. History doesn't whisper in simple lines. It hums, groans, giggles, chants. It feeds you stories, and some of them don't go down easy. But they stay with you, linger on the tongue, and long after the lights go out, they shape the dreams that follow. So, let your breath slow, let your limbs grow heavy, let your mind drift not to what's on your plate, but to the curiosity that led you here. And if you feel a presence in the room, something ancient, something watching, don't worry. It's just history, hungry to be remembered.